Thank you for joining us today for our history talk, From Bombardier to Congressional Gold Medal, a Chinese-American World War II pilot story with Smithsonian curator Cedric Yeh. Today we're going to learn more about Percy Loy, a Chinese-American pilot in the U.S. Army Air Force during World War II. Along the way, we'll explore the history of Chinese Americans and the challenges they faced and what it means to be an American. Cedric Yeh is the curator of the National September 11th collection. He also serves as the co-chair of the Asian Pacific American Initiatives Committee. As the project head of the Sweet and Sour Initiative, Yeh has worked on developing potential traveling exhibitions and expanded the museum's Chinese food-related collections. Additionally, in his time at the museum, Yeh has aided in the collection of Julia Child's kitchen, helped remove asbestos, and escorted R2-D2 to Germany. So it's my pleasure to welcome Cedric Yeh.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all doing well, both here and online. Thank you for joining me today. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank Jennifer and the National Museum of the Army, U.S. Army, for inviting me, and for the support of the Loy family. That is Percy Loy here, as you see over my right shoulder. Their donation and their support over the years has been wonderful, and not the least of which Daria for sending me this a package in support of today's conversation. Let's begin. So just really quickly, to follow up on that intro, we'll get off of this so there's no self-aggrandization. As we pointed out, I am the curator, my day job, National September 11th collections, of a side hustle that would be Asia Pacific American history and culture, in particular, Chinese food in America. So that's over there on the left. There's the hazmat on the right. And my job for R2-D2 was basically, according to Lucas himself, is no selfies. So, you know, that's my attempt at trying to, but okay. So some of what this is pointing to, and I'll come back to it, is the congressional medals, which are considered to be high-value objects at the museum, and I have an intimate relationship with them because, for instance, I have couriered the Japanese American Nisei Congressional Gold Medal across the country for over a year for 7 different Japanese communities, so that they could have their own smaller exhibitions built off of that. So I've also done that for the 65th Infantry Regiment, the Buccaneers. There's and including this, it was a shorter trip. I just needed to go to Alexandria to do the presentation for the Chinese American Congressional Gold Medal. Okay, so what I'm hoping to do today is do a brief introduction about what a Congressional Gold Medal is, how I think it relates to Chinese in America, and then we're going to be using Percy Loy's experiences during World War II as a way to constantly try to shift this and move this narrative. This is the Congressional Gold Medal, the Chinese American World War II Veterans Congressional Gold Medal. And take a look at this very intricate and lovely medal. So what is a Congressional Gold Medal? It is the highest civilian award given by the United States Congress. It's awarded to persons, institutions, or groups who have had a major and long-standing impact on American history and culture. It is not the only highest civilian award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, I believe I'm saying that correctly, but the difference would be the president gives those out every year. The Congress has to provide these. And speaking of which, just for a little housekeeping, how would Congress decide to issue Congressional Gold Medal for one of those above named reasons? Legislation must be co-sponsored by at least 2/3 of the members of the House, and at least 67 senators must co-sponsor any congressional medal legislation on both sides before it can go to committee and before it can be approved. Please keep that in mind. We'll be talking about some similar legislation as we go along. Once the legislation has passed both sides of Congress, the United States Mint steps in and begins design for each medal in cooperation with representatives of the awardees. So each Congressional Gold Medal has a very unique, design as chosen by representatives from within the community. Only one medal is struck. And then in some cases, Congress then says that medal should come to the Smithsonian. And thus I have, I oversee several of the more recent Asian Pacific American Congressional Gold Medals. We also have the Tuskegee Airmen Congressional Gold Medal, but that's over at Air and Space. And and when we have a little more time, if anyone is interested in finding out about how one ends up being a courier, bringing these medals, obviously the intrinsic value of the medal is important, but it's somewhat both complicated and mundane museum practices about how we travel loans across the United States. Okay. We'll get back to this slide, but so I had wanted to describe what was in the original legislation for the Chinese American Congressional Gold Medal, but I may have made it a rough transition here because one of the things I wanted to talk about was the Chinese American community before World War II, and the lines are taken directly from the legislation for the Congressional Gold Medal. So I don't quite sure that I did a good enough job. That ellipses there needs to be filled in. So I think I'm going to take this directly from the legislation. The United States remains forever indebted to the bravery, valor, and dedication that the Chinese American veterans of World War II displayed. Their commitment and sacrifice demonstrates a highly uncommon and commendable sense of patriotism and honor in the face of discrimination, which then leads, as this is from the legislation itself, to the acknowledgement that for this Congressional Gold Medal, they both recognize the service of the Chinese American veterans, but they also point out that they did this despite the anti-Chinese discrimination at the time. And as you can see here, as quoted from the legislation, approximately 40% of those who joined during World War II were not U.S. citizens due to the laws that denied citizenship to persons of Chinese descent. For myself, as I showed you earlier in the chart, my attempt to talk about Congressional Gold Medals and the Chinese American experience, it's important to understand the history of Chinese in the Americas. Having arrived around mid-1800s, and then slowly integrating into the West Coast and its communities, things began to take a turn as in the late 19th century. As you can see here, this is also quoted from the legislation for the Congressional Gold Medal. The Chinese immigrants weren't seen in the best of light. Laws were enacted, including the Chinese Exclusion Act, which is one of a kind law that, as it says here, restricted immigration and to a specific nationality. No more Chinese coming to the United States. It was at least in my opinion, a slow death for those Chinese that remained, because those that were here were largely bachelor communities. They had come here for work. The opportunity then to marry, start families, a lot of the traditional things that immigrants might have the opportunity to have were curtailed. I just want to provide this as a kind of background for it was not, and I know repeat that this is not, they did not face, it was a difficult time for the Chinese in America, but it was not that universally so across the board. But it is important to remember, it is the thing that I thought of when I first heard about both Chinese Congressional Gold Medal, Chinese American World War II Veterans Congressional Gold Medal, and Percy Loy's story, because of the period of time that we were in, and what we were, to get a sense of, and we'll get to this in a little bit, about whether or not, what it means to be an American, service and to your country. Would you be interested in doing so? Would you yourself do this if you were going through, if you had experienced this kind of systematic institutional discrimination for your country? I don't have any comments on that one way or another. It's just something to set the parameters and understand that when World War II starts. To follow up on the last slide, the Japanese invasion of China in 1937 did have an impact. And just as an aside, the World War II started for the rest of the world a lot sooner than when America joined. But it changed the public perception of Chinese in the United States. For a group initially welcomed for its labor and later targeted by nativists for exclusion, Chinese Americans slowly found more favorable attitudes among the general population as Americans of all backgrounds recognized that the importance of better relations with China and Chinese in America. And the Chinese Americans, many Chinese Americans participated in the call for military service as an expression of patriotism. One veteran recalled, all of a sudden, we Chinese Americans became part of the American dream. So as a result of those exclusionary laws, there were only about 78,000 Chinese Americans living in the United States or the mainland, with another 29,000 living in Hawaii at the start of World War II. And although small in number, they made contributions to the World War II effort. Of the total Chinese Americans serving, approximately 25% served in the U.S. Army Air Force, and the remainder served in all branches of the United States Armed Forces and all 4 theaters of war. The front of the medal depicts the servicemen and nurse, and you can see here it reflects the they have, they're in the Merchant Marine, Coast Guard, and are all represented then on the front of the medal, and then on the back is an Iowa-class battleship, an M4 Sherman tank, and a P-40 Warhawk from the Flying Tigers. In 1943, the United States ends the exclusion. Their partnership with China, their need for China to be an ally, made having such a law in the books awkward, to say the least. So it was, Congress repealed it, and we go, as you can see by the wonderful cartoon, we start then helping people better understand that we need our allies. And as an aside, Congress offers an official apology in 2012. This is the part where I mentioned earlier that, you know, the numbers, 2/3 in both sides, House and Senate, to pass a Congressional Gold Medal. The amazing part for an apology, and I think there's only been 4 apology laws the United States has passed, is that it has to be 100% in both sides of Congress, which, let's just say, may not happen anytime soon, again, for anything that, but let's move on to Captain Percy Lloyd, Lieutenant here throughout the photos, and even in the, I think in the blurb leading up to the presentation, he's going to show different ranks, but he retired, he separated from the Army Air Force as a captain, so we'll just refer to him as Captain Loy, as a lieutenant through a lot of these photos. And of course, he retired as a lieutenant colonel from the National Guard later in life. I mentioned earlier about my side hustle for the Chinese food in America. The Loy family had reached out because Percy, in his post-war life, had started a Chinese frozen food company in the Pacific Northwest, quite successful and well-known, that they asked if we'd be interested in collecting the records of that company. And I jumped at the chance. It was during that experience that they said, well, you know, Dad was pilot in World War II. And I was like, tell me more. You know, like I said, I have a random assortment of jobs at the Smithsonian, but, you know, the fact that I juggle Chinese food and national disasters is, you know, it's doesn't always line up well. But in this case, I said, okay. So I was introduced to Captain Loy's experiences during World War II, and I was immediately fascinated. I wanted to know more, and I was able to get the donation from the family, not only of the frozen food company, which is called Kubla Khan, but also of Captain Loy's time throughout World War II. And one of the reasons why I thought it was important is that the family kept very good records of what was happening to Percy as he went through his service. And that's very helpful to us if we want to hear the mundane side of the museum collecting. The idea here is that we often get approached by families who found papers, records, photos of their relatives and family members who served at some point, but especially the photographs come across, it's not easy to find context in it. It's not easy to be able to tell a story for future generations about what exactly it is we're looking at. But if the family, for instance, labels everything, who's in what picture, when that picture was taken, where, you know, and that's wonderful. It gives us the context. And I was eager to take the chance. Once again, thank you to the Loy family for being able to provide this. Captain Loy was born in Vancouver, Washington, December 11th, 1920, to a dairy farmer, Kong Loy. And we jump ahead just a little bit here. From 1931 to 1938, Captain Loy was a student at Lingnan University in Canton, China. This was a practice for Chinese communities that they would send children back to study in boys to China to be educated. And at the age of 11, Captain Loy was sent back to China to go to a Christian university founded by Western missionaries in China. And while he was studying there, the Japanese bombed Nanking in 1937. Loy, along with the rest of his schoolmates, were marched on foot to the coast, where they were put on boats to Hong Kong. Once in Hong Kong, they were left to wait alone until their families came from the United States to find them. Captain Loy would spend roughly a year living in an orphanage and on the streets of Hong Kong, waiting for passage back. Captain Loy never forgot the images of what happened, what he had seen in China, and knew how fortunate he was to be living in the United States. When he had the opportunity to enlist, which was in July of 1942, he did so. Agreeing to serve for the duration of the war plus 6 months. So he was ordered to active duty as an aviation cadet in January of 1943 in the San Antonio Aviation Cadet Center. And if you're doing your math or following along at home, so his 1942 to 1947 was Captain Loy's enlistment in the Army Air Forces. His service has taken him all over the United States. Was briefly attached to the 882nd Bombardment Squadron and the 87 Fighter Bomber Squadron. And but it's in 1943, December of 1943, that he accepts a commission, the Air Corps' 87th Flying Training Squadron in Victoryville Army Airfield, at Victoryville Army Airfield. So we have okay, so there's a lot of different things going on here. Like I said, one of the reasons why I was fascinated about accepting the donation from the Loy family is that they documented everything so well. So these photos are thanks to them, yes, but they're also comes in bunches to explain Captain Loy's experience while he was both training. I believe that's how they labeled the middle photo, training in his classmates, and then him in his bomber gear getting ready to go up, so that we can follow his journey as he goes through his training, and then eventually, and why I mentioned Victoryville Army Airfield is that if I understand the records correctly, that's when he comes into one of his one of the more fascinating parts of his time in the Army Air Force, which is as the ground school instructor, officer in charge of Chinese training, squadron commander. That's how the U.S. Army paperwork is labeled it. So essentially, if you remember, he was studying in China, and he was fluent in both Mandarin and Cantonese. And when the U.S. declared, the alliance with China, and the exclusionary law, one of the first things they wanted to do was help train up Chinese nationalist army and their pilots. So one of Percy's jobs, and why I thought this was pretty, like I said, fascinating, was to coordinate that training. He was able to communicate with the Chinese nationalist pilots that came over, and bombardiers and navigators, to learn how to fly. And he went through and taught Chinese students. I couldn't help but include this little graphic that I found in their clip of donated photos. I wasn't aware what a bombing computer looked like in 1943, but that apparently is it. And if you, I'm wondering if someone has, added that in the print. I don't believe so. As a matter of fact, the printing on the back of the photos said that this was only available at through. I can never find its information. Where is it? I got it. All right, hold on. Specific airbase, and that they allowed this photo to be released. As you can imagine, they were just going to share it. But you can see him using and teaching the Chinese national pilots on how to. Bombardier is basically his most of the training was related to showing and teaching the Chinese nationals and his students how to better prepare for bombing runs. He himself, though, also instructed flying, as I mentioned, the ground school instructor, along with a multitude of other talents we mentioned as navigator also. But I think the idea that when America committed to working with the Chinese as allies in the Pacific theater, and that we would share resources as in training their pilots. That one of the things that was going to be in great need was the ability to speak Mandarin or Cantonese, which Captain Loy could do, and he was put in a very good position, and he took full advantage of that. One of the stories that the family has told me that on top of just your daily routine of teaching Chinese pilots and helping them prepare for their war, when Chinese generals came to visit the training grounds, and there were high-level conversations going on, Captain Loy was asked to attend also, not necessarily as a translator, but to listen in and see if everything that was being said between the interpreters and for the Chinese visiting delegation was what was being said. At least that's what the family has passed on along to me. I think that Captain Loy had a very interesting experience here in the next slide. Oh, yes. More information, of course, Chinese detachment, those Percy, Captain Loy and his colleagues and students. And then, of course, a nice PR photo on the left, where nothing like a handshake over bonds. Everything, you can't bond better than that. I've already made a big deal out of this idea that for the Chinese American community, before and leading up to and afterwards for World War II, wasn't exactly the most inclusive experience. They were dealing with some institutional discrimination, and it was very, very difficult. I've cut out some of the more awkward language within the Congressional Gold Medal legislation. A lot of violence, a lot of unfortunate history there. But I just thought it was amazing that Captain Loy's, along with the photographs, we have letters, commendations, and a series of just good reference material that show that he had an excellent time at training, at being trained, and then training. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but there is no indication he was a good pilot. He was a good instructor, and when he trained, and so while I've laid that groundwork, that wasn't something that, as far as I or the family knows, like that Captain Loy had to deal with. But it is, I bring that up in a broader sense for the Chinese American experience, to ask that question about, what exactly does it mean to be an American, and whether or not, if your experience in America up until then was that of exclusion, would you have enlisted when it became okay to, when they said, we'll take anyone at the start of World War II? It's not as perhaps awkward as the Japanese American Nisei experience, or the Japanese experience, the 442nd, and that Congressional Gold Medal and what it represents. But certainly something that I try to bring up whenever I give any tours or presentations, to just think about where exactly we were in the country and how that works for you as an individual, and whether or not you would have enlisted. The materials provided by the family are, I'm just going to keep on repeating that I was very much infatuated by the ability to follow a man's story through all of this wonderful reference material. And so, we can tell, because he kept a detailed flight log about his training opportunities, what he was experiencing, and the fact that he would occasionally, and I think that both myself and the family were like a little odd, but sometimes he would make a note. I flew, got lost in a storm first time, or I was like, well, that's awkward. I don't know much about flying, but I do know that sometimes really bad things happen for those. But these as one entry reads, my hat flew off the cockpit. So that windows open out the window. So hey, you know what? Things are and he also had a friendship book too, which the entries are I wasn't aware that was a thing, but he had a lot of people fill it out, and every single one of them was almost universally laudatory for having trained with him and as a classmate, which once again speaks against the kind of description that I brought out about what America was like, being Chinese in America at the time. All right, and I'll end sort of with this. I mentioned Kublai Khan. There is probably, we'll just go up to the lieutenant colonel now. After leaving the service in 1947, starts a family business, Kublai Khan, frozen foods, and continues the I think this should be said that Captain Lloyd loved his country, and his time in the service had a profound effect upon him, and he carried it through to his work and his business afterwards. And of course, he stayed in the Air Force National Guard afterwards. I just wanted to show people a little bit about, let me say, and he continued those ideals that he picked up, both being as a instructor and as someone who deeply affected by and the start of World War II, and wanted to protect his country and serve his country. So in case you want to have any ancillary questions about Chinese food in America afterwards, I'll answer those too. I'm not sure how much about Kublai Khan that I know, but I'll try and do that also. And then I just thought, please, I know that some of the Loy families, I found this photo. It feels very, very PR. Like they said, we need like a good shot of you at the local malt bar, just enjoying. But there's time for some Q&A.
Videographer is making me come to the top for questions. But we have a number of questions that I've got down here. And the first is, did he have any combat experience, or did he remain exclusively as a trainer?
He remained stateside, as far as I know. I think I've looked that up. Sorry, I don't believe so. He did travel both for his training and his own training and his training of other pilots. He traveled all across the United States. The records in his logbook are pretty incredible.
Kind of going along that theme. So did almost all the training take place in the United States, or did any of it take place outside?
I don't believe so. The records that we do have, it still happened in the United States.
You mentioned that photographs and training logs were a part of his collection, but did he leave behind any oral histories, or did he speak to his family a lot about his service?
I believe that we were able to get all the three-dimensional objects and reference materials, photographs, photo albums. I don't believe he's done. His family hasn't let me know if he's done any oral histories. I'm just saying I don't believe he has, and I don't think there's other more specific information about his time. Mostly, what I've been doing is working with the family to try and fill in the gaps, if you will, from what we do have. And of course, as with all of these, it's not always the easiest thing after such a long period of time. And of course, Percy has passed on. And so we find it more difficult to fill in those blanks.
The next question is, did he stay in touch with any of the soldiers do you know of that he trained with or trained?
That's a very good question, and one that I think the family might be better. I have not asked that question, so I won't. I do not know. I apologize for.
So the other question is stepping back in time a little bit to the beginning of the story. Was it common for people of Japanese descent who were living in America to travel back and forth from China to study?
Japanese or
Chinese?
Chinese?
Sorry.
Yes, yes. It continues to today. It's still largely. I mean, there was a point as I mentioned, I do a lot of Chinese in America studies through Chinese food and restaurants. And if you look at the Chinese restaurant owners, many of them, while they're starting up their Chinese restaurants here, it is not uncommon to have sent their children back to China for whatever to be raised until they can get their feet set here in America for many different reasons, including going back to school. I myself have had that wonderful experience. So it continues. I wasn't always aware of what was going on, but yes, we get sent back. It is common.
Thank you for that. And the next two questions I have are Congressional Gold Medal related. You mentioned that there's a group of representatives who are chosen to help design the Congressional Gold Medal. How are those representatives chosen?
And that I can't answer that question, but I'm going to do it with some reluctance because my knowledge in that field is much more from my association at the end point. Like, of course, I'm receiving the completed Congressional Gold Medal. I have had, up until that point of the donation, I will have had communications with whatever group has helped shepherd the Congressional Gold Medal through the process. And it's usually whatever, so that's community groups, local leaders, it's grassroots. It can, since some of these are military rewards, they will have a high-ranking general, retired general attached to help spearhead the experience. In my experience with Congressional Gold Medals that we received, it's those groups that have had the most success in spearheading like the attempt to get the legislation passed that will have a say in what the design is. But I think one of the things that I've learned is that they do try to be inclusive, or since it's often a grassroots effort, a lot of people can have opinions and it can be counted, and it thus makes it a little more complicated to get the medal minted. There's a gap in after the legislation is passed before the mint actually can get started, because those various groups have to come together and agree on what the one medal is going to look like. Oh, and as an aside, I think if anybody is in that, if after the, I should have mentioned this, after the medal was, the Mint, U.S. Mint casts in the Congressional Gold Medal and it's shipped to us, if we're designated the official repository, anyone who the medal is supposed to represent, so in this case, Chinese American World War II vets, can then request a copper copper replica of what that medal is. So it just one official Congressional Gold Medal, but everybody can purchase a replica. So that's how it works.
And then our final question is actually my question, because I find it fascinating that you're the courier for the Congressional Gold Medal. How does that work when you're traveling with it? Do you just put it in your backpack, or does it get its own seat on a plane? How does that work?
All right. Now that you ask that, I could talk on hours, because I've certainly done plenty of it, but I realize now that I put it out in the open, part of being a courier like that is anonymity, which I'm about. I'm trying to balance how it goes. So, yes, there have been objects, so I'll speak a little broadly. I have moved, it hasn't always been a Congressional Gold Medal, but yes, it can sometimes have its own traveling container. It can get its own seat. It can have its own, as if it's a living thing. It gets its own travel. The the Japanese American Congressional Gold Medal had a fascinating route, as it was sponsored by veteran associations with connections, and at one point getting me around the country, because it took a lot of flying to make sure that I was in the right place, because I had to do all the handling. They were like military bases. Tied to the storm of the, there's military transports leaving every day. We can get you on one really easy, no problem. And I was like, wait, I don't know about that. And then we're like, yeah, no, we cheap. You don't have to worry about flights. I was like, okay, I think I'll think about it. And that has been repeated because security is important, and thus we have special regulations on who's with me. I will have security with me if I have the object with me. R2 is different. R2, yes. When I went to Germany with R2 wasn't the high value object, surprisingly enough. It was 9/11 materials that the German National Museum had requested. Those things were unique, and I was there to make sure that they were safe. But before I can keep going on, but it's not as if I have any special. It's just that they were within my collection. I was overseeing it, and you need official museum representation when you're traveling with certain objects from the museum. And once I got started, especially after that year traveling with the Japanese World War II vet medal, I became a go-to. Everybody would ask me to bring their thing to somewhere. I brought a Rolex to Australia, and to go, and it sounds good, but it had gone down to the bottom of the ocean, and the anniversary was coming up. So they wanted to celebrate that amazing feat, the Rolex and the submarine it was attached to. And so I brought the Rolex too. That was my last trip before the pandemic set in. I think now that I've outed myself, I will not be able to, much like an air marshal who's no longer like in their hand, because then other people will just want to sit next to me on any of my flights.
And thank you again to Cedric Yeh for this wonderful presentation today. It was so great to learn more about Chinese service in the U.S. Army, and also just to learn more about this wonderful individual and an aspect of World War II history that I had no idea about training Chinese nationals during the war. So thank you to everyone joining us both virtually and in person.